Hey, welcome everybody. It's time for a brand new show. The Story of Selling. A show that uses stories from the past to understand the future. The future of selling. Right here on The Story of Selling. I'm Paul Roberts, producer here at OC Talk Radio. And today we're proud to bring in the host and introduce you to the guy that's going to be guiding these stories, leading these stories, telling these stories. We're talking about Paul Petersen, who celebrated 50 years of technology and over 35 years as a quota-carrying sales guy. So let's bring him in, the man with the bag full of stories, Paul Petersen. Hey, how are you?
Paul Roberts, it's a pleasure to be working together again. When a couple of months ago, my son took a job in sales, and I sat down to give him some tips, and he liked some of them. He expressed the interest that things are changing, and from that, I called you. Said I'd like to get a blog going, get a podcast, and as a good producer, you pushed it and said, let's do something live and let's get guests and let's expand that from tips to the future. So I think we found a pretty dynamic topic, and I'm a little humbled to be hosting that topic, guiding that conversation, because I'm not Zig Ziglar, I'm not Brian Tracy, I'm not Michael Bosworth, right? But I have lived my life and made my living selling.
I'll tell you why you're the perfect guy for it. Because one, you've been doing this a long time, and two, you were there. In fact, you and some others like you were instrumental in the conversion of sales as an art. The days of Willie Loman, where you just followed another sales guy and you learned his tricks, his techniques, his sales pitches, how to close, how to create relationships. It was all about that one-to-one sales. And it really was an art. Yeah, I think it really was an art to selling. It wasn't a science. And along comes CRM a number of years ago, which seems so simple. Let's just collect some data. Let's track things over time. And I think in some way you opened up this new world. Is sales, so I'll ask you, is sales a science today, a data-driven process, or is it still an art, an interpersonal art?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, nobody comes out as a young kid and says, I want to be a salesman, right?
Yeah.
So they are people come to it of their own accord. Or in my case, I was encouraged by a friend, and he's actually going to be our guest, our first guest. Somebody saw something and said, go, we'll talk to him about that. But there's definitely process involved. And anytime you have process, you have data. Now, what you do with that or where you find that data depends. And CRM is one good place to find it. I always thought that it was more than just tracking your call activity, right? It was, which was an old measure. How many calls did you make today?
Exactly.
Right? And one of the things I learned early in my sales career was that, and this was Neil Rackham and Spin Selling, was that too many calls was counterproductive, because there were some clients or prospects you needed to spend some time with.
Yeah, right.
To listen. And that changed. So that was a fundamental change in the way process was being taught. Now there are still some areas that dialing for dollars is the way to go, and that's a tough business now. And there's the other side too, that you started out in sales, right? I started out as a programmer.
I started off selling copiers. I came out of college, and the only job I could get, I wanted to get into Hollywood, and so I took the copier sales route because it allowed me to go into the studios and at least walk in the door.
Why did you leave sales?
I left sales because it was a grind. I left sales because I could see you could make a lot of money at it, but it was a repetitive process. The way I was taught, it was sort of a game. Somebody won and somebody lost. It wasn't really about what's best for them. It was about what's best for you. Could you convince them to buy something, whether they need it or not? In my case, I sold the lousiest copier on the block, really, truthfully. And it was clunky, it was large, and it was also the most expensive copier. This is when they were moving from liquid copiers, which I still sold, to the new dry powder copiers that everybody's seen. And so I had this lemon I'm trying to sell. And so what they would tell us to do is walk in and say, now, of course, I'm showing you the most expensive copier in the market here right now. And you'd set this expectation that it was somehow the gold. It may not be for you, the takeaway clothes. I'm not sure you can afford this. I'm not sure you really want this. And all these kinds of tricks and stuff. And I felt like we were just tricking them. I really did.
And so I grew up in the age of win-win, that if you found a win for the customer, you were likely to win. Right. And that changes the dynamic because I think under what you learned, it was the salesman controls the process.
Yes.
And what I learned was that, no, the buyer does.
Right.
So they may not be following your steps, or they may come at you at step 4 and you got to figure out, do I take them back to step 1 and, or restart the process? But that was a lot of the old school thinking that we own the process, we control the sale and we win, as opposed to stepping back a little bit, let the customer talk. We'll keep coming back to that theme, and then sort of sorting out what the next, the most logical next step is from that. So I learned that, you were talking about data, and it's a favorite topic of yours, but there was data that was helpful without being, so in marketing, for example, they're all about how many visits to the website and how many likes and how many reviews, right?
Absolutely. And right. A and B testing, what message worked the best, and everything is measured, everything's monitored, and everything is it's like the movie business sort of became like that too a little bit. It's not instinct anymore. It's all just numbers. And so you're testing everything. It's market testing every message. It's seeing what kind of response you get.
And I think that's smart, but from a sales perspective, there really isn't a lot of data that salespeople can use, right? For example, from a website, if I know what page they were on, maybe that's helpful. But what we found is that, well, pretty much everybody puts a call in after they hit the pricing page or the demo page. Right. So there was no real shocker of, it was pretty obvious that if those pages existed, your prospects were going to hit those pages first. So they didn't give you any particular insight as to where they were or what they were thinking at the time they hit that, right? But what I used to do would look at the data and say, in the CRM, when did you first hit my website? And how much time has elapsed since that first time to the second? Was it a day? Are there other people from your company hitting the website at the same time, indicating a lot of activity, right? Or I haven't heard from you in 6 months, so why are you coming back, right? I found those things, that little insight, that data capture, to give me a guidance as to what to say next. I'll give you one real example from the past, and that was in my career, I've sold direct, I've managed a channel, I've been a channel partner, I've worked with distributors, and I've now managed sales and marketing for Goldmine, a division of Avanti. Right. But at the time, we didn't have a lot of prospects coming in for a product called WinFax, but I would get these sell-through reports from CDW.
I had WinFax. I remember WinFax. Yeah,
great product. We used to give it away and then sell upgrades.
Right.
OEM it. But I would go through the list from CDW and see company names that I recognized. Oh, you bought 5. Amico Oil bought 5. Well, there are thousands of employees, and then I would call in. So using that data helped guide me as to who I wanted to talk to, and I had a jumping off point, sort of a call to warm lead. You were doing cold stuff, and that's
we're just walking in. Hey, copier's here. Anybody want one? And we're trying to do it in one sale. It's the car sales approach. We're trying to close you today.
Yeah, and so part of this started. I was sitting down with my son, who took a job in sales, and he's been a cold caller and is doing that again, and he's looking to elevate himself. And we were sharing some tips. And I found that some of them were still relevant. And I thought, well, I'll write a blog. And then talking with you, we got on to let's do a live podcast. And it turns out,
I was just going to say, I think sales has really gone through some evolution. I grew up, my father was a salesman, so that's probably why we tried sales. And he was a good salesman. He sold, he didn't sell cars. He trained dealers. He was the dealer relations manager and some regional manager and other things. So his job was to sell cars to the dealers or get the dealers to buy cars and to train them how to sell better cars. And he was very good at it. Oddly enough, he never did retail sales. He never actually got on the floor and had to face that cold sweat when you're working off straight commission and you haven't sold anything all weekend and you're getting a little choke in your throat here, like I did trying to sell copiers here. But what my point is, it was all about the we called it the IBM sales method. I don't know what other people called it, but it was always about qualifying and the various steps. First you got to qualify them, and then you got to do the features and benefits, and you're always be closing. You got to ask 3 times for the order, and then whoever, there's a point where who talks next loses. All these things. It was an art form that you mastered. There was no data involved in it whatsoever. And then somewhere along the way, it became consultative sales. It became win-win sales. I may not even sell you my product. I'm just here a consultant to find out what's best. It might be somebody else's product. It's a slower process. I'm going to spend multiple visits with you and then come back with some analysis here.
And the prospect goes, "Who are you? Why am I going to spend all this time with you?"
Yeah,
So,
right. It
finding a
evolved
way
into something, and then somewhere along the way, you guys, Goldmine, I think you were the first or one of the first. You started this whole wave that we had to collect data, and I used to hate it because I thought data was just, I sort of got out of it by then. It seemed like, was the data for me, or was it just for my manager to monitor my activity and see what I was doing? What do you think?
I think the industry has shifted a little bit from that, but there's still a question of what value is CRM to the field sales force if it doesn't present them with leads and some history. So, for example, at our corporation, we embedded Zoom info so that you could look at the corporation and things that we used to have to mail off for 10K statements or try to do organizational mapping. Like that was real big with strategic selling. Right. Now that's right there. Now, do you learn how to use that tool? I'll give you an example of what we're going to try to do here, because the mission, right, is to talk to sales leaders about how they got into sales, their challenges today, what their wins from the past, whatever it might be that influenced them, and start to see if we can find what's changed, if anything, and if so, how are you adapting? And we're going to hear from some people who are telling us how to do this, right?
That's it.
And one example I'll give is, have you ever heard the expression "press hard, 5 copies"?
No, I've never heard that one before.
Oh my gosh, it's a classic. Slight digression. I worked in a heavy equipment mechanics place, and I was part of the parts department, and the sales department would answer, "If it's in stock, we got it." I always loved that. And that was, I thought, wow, that said a lot, and it was true. Right. And, but the press hard 5 copies, orders used to be on 5 copies with something called carbon paper.
Oh yeah. What am I thinking? Yeah, of course. Right.
You had white, which went to the customer. You had blue, which went to accounting. You had goldenrod, and you had pink, which went to and pick lists and things like that. Right. But use that as an example of saying, back then you had to fill in the form and submit these copies, and they got routed all around, the company. Right. It's a great, a metaphor for technology. So back then, I was payphones. Mm-hmm. We were looking at fax. OCR was big, and maps. You had to have maps and things like that. Now today, sales rep, they're using email. They're using their phone for virtually everything. Yeah. Texting. You've got Zoom calls and WebEx instead of. I used to get off a plane and have a handful of quarters and head over to the bank of phones, right?
You and everybody, they all race to get that first phone, because I'm going to sit there and line up all my calls and make sure that my appointments are ready and all that. Yeah. So
the kids of today don't know that, and they shouldn't. That was our world, but that shows how we've adopted more technology. The other thing that we wanted to touch on in this show, right? So we'll have some tips, like what kind of technology should you have, how to use it, whether it's for me, you, or our guests, but we're going to touch on some tips, and I have some others.
Because it still is an art. I think it's both. But I think too often we tend to dismiss those days that you and I grew up in as irrelevant to today. Today it's email. Today it's blast. Today it's A/B testing and lots of data and stuff here. And the risk is that we become it's too automatic. It becomes too much technology driven. It's just push, no listen, no conversation. Yeah.
And what salespeople have to acknowledge is that the buyers have changed. Mm-hmm. They're more educated than before. Things that you used to do, for example, they would invite vendors in because that's how they learned about the options. Yes. Now they don't have to do that. So you don't have that opportunity to get on a plane. You mentioned that art still. You and I were talking, and we were talking about relationships
Yes.
and how that took a hit in during the pandemic.
Right.
I can't bring you donuts. I can't get in the conference room with you. Well, post pandemic, apart from the bands, now so many people are working remote. You can't get them all in one room anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So you're forced to use something like Zoom. But I was on a call with a prospect. We were walking them through a discussion and a brief demo as a backdrop. And they happened to mention that one of their clients was a company that's about a mile from where I live. Mm-hmm. And I found myself going, that's it. I hang my head on that. Oh my gosh, I know them. I drive by that every day.
Right.
And we chatted a bit about, oh, that's where you live. And, it established
that personal connection.
Gem.
Exactly. There's something that connects you and I as people here. Other people I knew, they'd walk in and they'd immediately scan the wall to see if, oh, you went to school there. What is something we could find in common here, or something we could start the conversation with?
The problem was that a lot of salespeople would spend too much time on that aspect.
Right.
Or they'd be inappropriate. You've heard the joke about the Green Bay Packers and
I think I have to go ahead and tell it again here. Right?
Well, you noticed that there's a Green Bay Packer, a player on a picture on his desk, and he said, "Oh, I love the Green." The sales rep had said, "Oh, there's only two kinds of people in Green Bay, hookers and football players."
That's right.
And the prospect turned around the picture and said, "My wife's a Green Bay Packer fan."
Yeah.
Oh, really? What position did she play?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You could get yourself in trouble if you
spend too much time and try to make too much connection. But I think we'll have some tips, which I think are going to be practical best practices that we can jump off on. So every show we'll have one show that'll be a tip, very specific practical advice. We'll explore it a little bit. Is it relevant for today or not? Is it interesting? As a historic relic? Does it have any implications for the future? So you and I will sort that out. Right. And then the next show will be a guest. We'll ask them to comment on that. We'll ask them to talk about their challenges today, their biggest success, why they're in sales, why it's a good profession, and so forth. And the other thing that we'll try to address is some concepts. So you and I talked about this, right? You mentioned it. Is it art versus science?
That's one of the questions. I think that's still an open debate. It's clearly both, but in the early days when I learned it, it was all an art that you had to master and learn from a master. You follow somebody around. Today, I fear too many of these young guys, like your son perhaps, or the people that are training him, see it as just a data-driven process. It's just sheer numbers. It's just a data stream that you're generating. And I don't know that they take the time to get to know their customer or listen to them.
And I agreed. Yeah, I've watched many companies where there's a focus on what's in the forecast, but there's no discussion of it. So, for example, with my team, I like to use a forecast as an agenda. It's a way to say, well, tell me about this deal. Who do you know? What's the next step? And use it as a great opportunity to coach a rep, or at least just get up to speed and be able to assess, hey, we're far along, we're not far along, as opposed to the normal looking good, boss, and then at the end of the quarter, not looking so good.
Yeah, right. Whoops, that one didn't happen. Okay, next one.
So some people fall into the data trap. But the other one was some of the concepts that art, data versus personal selling. The other one is something I call the invisible hand. Mm-hmm. And this is where, if I have an example from my past, and that was selling to a division of DuPont. And my FSE, I'm in computer technology, so you travel with a technical product expert. Myself, we're sitting there, and the prospect across the desk revealed that, I don't even own PCs. We don't even have a network.
Wow. Okay.
My product needed that. My FSE physically stood up. Now, this is where the invisible hand comes in.
Right.
Something prompted me to say, why not?
Rather than just walk out.
I was curious. I wanted to know. And at the time, he said, because we don't have a reason to make the ROI, to make this worthwhile. And I go, well, let's talk, because everybody needed a PC on our network. And so while that helped drive, it gave him some ammo to say, I can cut costs here and here and here if you let me do this. And by the way, everybody will benefit from it. My FSE was back on the plane waiting for me to order a drink.
Yeah.
And he's wondering why. He once said my sales style was like watching somebody churn butter.
Really? Okay. All right.
It was really slow.
It took a while for it to come together to see what it's going to become. Yeah.
but a good product. But let me share what I think is recently one of the most perfect sales I've experienced. Being a sales guy, right? You ever watch somebody selling to you and you realize what you're responding to and not?
Absolutely. Every sales guy appreciates a good sales pitch or a good sales approach, right?
So I uh, I walked. I was in an airport and I realized I forgot my headphones.
Mm-hmm.
So I just happened to be walking by one of those kiosks or stores where they sell headphones and all kinds of musical adapters and so forth. And I walked into the store. So at this point, right, I'm not somebody this guy developed the lead. I walked into the store. I had some interest.
Yep.
He said, "Is there something specific I can help you with?"
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, "What do you want?"
Yeah.
And I explained I'd lost something and I had Bose headphones and, it's a long flight. I got a long flight back, blah, blah, blah. And he said, "Well, which one do you have?" And I told him, he said, "Well, there's a newer model." He goes, "But I think you should really take a look at these." And he shows me these new earbone buds. I said, "Yeah, I swallowed in my ears." And he goes, "Oh, let me show you how they fix that."
Mm-hmm.
And with one step, he did it. So we went from not buying anything to, was I going to spend $300 or $340?
Right.
And he wrapped it up and I left, and they're one of the best things I did. But to me, that was a great sale because he asked me what I was looking for.
Specifically.
So I spilled my guts.
Right.
He didn't push me to anything. He made a suggestion. I balked, and he said, "Well,"
and he came across as an expert. He came across as somebody that you could trust or believe. You don't know whether this kid knows or not, but he conveyed to you that he has some knowledge about this and some enthusiasm for it. And that enthused you.
Yeah. Well, his suggestion was, "You already own the big ones. Don't own two of them. Get something different." Right. And that was a brilliant suggestion. And then he had to convince me on the product side. But that was one of the fastest, best sales that I've ever seen. I've got another sale where every time I walk into the store, I buy something, and I just decided, well, I can't walk in there because I don't know what this guy's got.
And I can't seem to resist his approach.
So we'll invite a guest. We're going to, as I said, we'll ask them about their challenges and so forth. We'll cover the principles of it, and we'll try to get these tips out. And so today I had a little fun one here as we get to closing, and that is just to give you an example. There's something called Back to the Future Prospect. That's a really bad Christopher Lloyd.
Yeah, I was going to say Back to the Future.
Buzz. Yeah, Back to the Future Prospect. What's a future prospect? Well, anyway, we'll talk about that in one of the future episodes about how to categorize and optimize some of your pipeline. And on the next episode, we'll have Ben Slick, who's vice president of HydroPoint. They sell water irrigation management software.
Interesting. Okay.
He was sold networking to me at Allied Van Lines, where I was director of software. Mm-hmm. And many years later, was the gentleman who hired me to work at WinFax, where we implemented an enterprise licensing program and direct force the corporation. So he'll have a lot to share about.
So he brought you into sales. This is your sales guru. This is your sales mentor.
I found in technology, my dad always said this, everybody's selling something. Mm-hmm. And I was a programmer selling a new version of what I wanted to write. Or I was I helped organize a POS system. I was a business manager for a company that sold POS systems to McDonald's. Mm-hmm. So I found we were always selling something, but I wasn't getting paid for it.
Right.
So I made the switch. It suited my energy. It suited my personality to do that. And it suited my ADHD, undiagnosed at the time.
And you like churning butter. Okay, so whatever.
We like churning butter. So,
well, I'll tell you what appeals to me about this story, and you and I have talked a lot about this. Maybe it just reminds me of these old days, the Willie Loman days, my dad's days, and the early days I tried to not very well successfully sell stuff, copiers. And a couple other things along the way till I found my passion to get back into radio and do broadcasting and the entertainment industry. What appeals to me is this. We all love hearing these stories. Oh, my goodness, when you get together with successful salespeople, particularly people who've been out on the road for a while, been carrying a bag for a while, they got stories. Some of them are funny. Some of them are informative. Some of them are mind-boggling, but I'm sure you got lots of stories. And then it leads to the fact, why do I want to hear stories of the past? Because it predicts the future. Are we in a new time? I think sales has somehow morphed. I don't know if it's gone too far one way or another, but sales, how we sell stuff has certainly changed. And the fear is, and I think the hope of some companies is, we can get rid of salespeople.
Yeah.
We'll just make it an automatic thing. It's up there. Do you want it or not? And you order it, and that's it. And maybe there's somebody walks you through the ordering process. But this idea of selling is still up in the air. Do we need salespeople?
I think you need, it's going to be a great question as we ask our guests, because I think the definition of a salesman will change. Biz dev reps will still have a hard job, but normal account executives are going to have to be a lot more knowledgeable about the product, about the use of it. They can't just be talking features and putting up slideshows, and then getting that knowledge is hard. It's very hard. I've encouraged my son to learn your product, visit customers who use it, understand it, because then that's how you'll find the jumping off point for you're changing the way people sell.
And is selling still just talking and controlling the conversation and trying to convince somebody, or is it what you were implying, what came after me, this idea of consultative sales, of listening, of responding, of asking questions? The world is still up in the air. Which way are salespeople going? They want to push the conversation and close the deal, or do they want to do what's best for both parties here? We'll find out.
I think what will happen is that the way I learned was to be flexible to the customer, and I did that because I wasn't all that good at consistent process. So it was a fault. I wasn't good at consistent
You turned
process.
a negative into a positive. I can't remember the pitch perfectly, so I'm just going to ask questions.
I'll just shut up. And the customer basically, when they wanted to buy, told me what they were doing. I would figure that out. Oh, today you have to find a way to test the interest wherever they are. I've done some deals that were just text deals, a couple of questions. And where you don't spend a lot of time, or PowerPoints never come up, and you still have to convey that key information somehow, but you've got to have a customer or a prospect that's interested. And cold calling, I think, is still very, very, very hard.
Yeah, and I don't know, some people say cold calling's dead. It's all just inbound sales now. It's just to get people to come to your site and open the chat or start a conversation. I don't know if I buy that either. I also don't know how to do personal relationships on Zoom or on text or on email. I don't know how you convey that, can create that connection there. It helps if you can see them, but it's quick, it's distant, it's separate. I don't know. That's a whole other question.
Everything's a podcast now, but when you get a Zoom call, whether it's your family or your employees or prospects, you've got to take care of presentation. It's different. Now, there's a good side to it, right? I was talking with somebody and they said, we wouldn't put our junior salespeople on a plane to go to that meeting, but on a Zoom call, I can have them sit there and listen, and maybe let them.
And you said that, and I thought that's the kind of ideas and eye openers I'm looking for in this show, because I tend to think of Zoom as taking away personal relationships, but maybe it opens the door to have more people in the conversation too. So.
Right. Well, so I think we're at a good cutting off point,
yes,
right? And we've got lots of work ahead of us, and we're going to find our way through it. And I'm looking forward to it. I think you opened up a pretty dynamic topic for us to explore, and we're going to have some great people talk with us about it. So thanks, Paul.
I look forward to joining in once a week and to listening in once a week as you bring in other guests here on OC Talk Radio as we blast this conversation out to our audience and the world about the story of selling.